Hello, I have the opportunity to present most of Chapter 5 for class tonight. I'll be covering the topic of labor and management strategies, structures, and constraints. For part of this chapter, I'll go into greater detail than for other parts of it. First, we'll talk about traditional U.S. union strategies and alternatives. There are various models of union representation, as you can see by the table on the screen, and by the way, I apologize that it's not perfectly aligned in terms of columns. Traditionally, labor unions in the United States have embraced business unionism, which believes the key to equity and voice in the workplace is collective bargaining. Job control unionism is another traditional strategy where unions seek to protect their members from volatile managers and markets by negotiating detailed legalistic union contracts that tie employee rights to narrowly defined jobs while removing labor from business decision making. It essentially replaces arbitrary management control with union negotiated seniority systems for allocating jobs and determining pay and benefits. If I understand this strategy accurately, I'd say that IUP's AFSCME union exercises job control unionism. Craft unionism, also known as occupational unionism, involves a single union representing only workers in a single occupation or craft. For example, separate unions for electricians, for iron workers, plumbers, carpenters, painters, and other like professions. This was more common prior to the rise of the modern factory and is still prevalent in the construction industry. Finally, industrial unionism centers on an industry rather than a craft. An example of this may be the automobile industry. Other examples might be United Textile Workers of America, Amalgamated Clothing Makers of America, the United Mine Workers of America, or the Textile Workers Union of America. At least that's what I'm thinking, and I will defer to Dr. Furketic on that. Each of these is a passive servicing model, which means union officials conduct collective bargaining. As a result of debates among and between critics within and outside of the labor movement, alternatives to traditional union strategies are suggested, which brings us to our next slide. These debates are the result of greater need for flexibility and quality that have arisen from increased foreign and non-union competition. To identify effective alternatives, we must consider the scope of representation as well as the soul of representation. The scope of representation describes the breadth of the representation activities. So, for instance, whether union activity is concentrated in the workplace or in the broader political and social arenas. The soul of representation captures how the representation is pursued or delivered. For instance, especially regarding the extent of rank and file participation. This is viewed as a passive servicing model, and alternative strategies seek to actively engage rank and file union activities. Now we'll talk about the organizational structure of unions and labor management in the United States. The majority of union members have the most contact with their local union. And you can see on the screen here that we have represented local unions, national unions, and general unions. I'll do another slide right after this one. Actually, I'll go to that slide now. A local union may represent many workers from a single workplace or an industrial local, workers in a single occupation from several workplaces or a craft local, or multiple occupations in multiple workplaces in multiple industries, which is essentially an amalgamated local. Local unions have various elected or appointed officials or agents and or shop stewards who serve as the primary points of contact for most unionized employees, with the steward's most important responsibility processing grievances filed within their work groups. Additionally, local unions are governed by a president and executive committee who are democratically elected. Some local unions may also have special committees such as negotiation committees and grievance committees, and they may become involved in local politics or in organizing new members. Nearly all local unions are part of a national union. There are about 100 national unions in the United States. The largest include the National Education Association, or NEA, which has 3 million plus members, the Teamsters, United Food and Commercial Workers, Service Employees International Union, and American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. All of these have more than 1 million members. National unions are governed by traditional democratic methods and have officers that are periodically elected by members directly or by union delegates indirectly. Each national union also has a constitution with bylaws and procedures. Today, many unions represent all workers in a single industry, such as the United Steelworkers of America or the United Auto Workers, but many have diversified and merged over the years to become general unions rather than true industrial or craft unions. In the interest of time and space, I won't get into the pros and cons of general unions. I don't go into a great deal of detail, as I said, on the pros and cons of the various union types, but I will mention that union democracy is a well-known concept. Conceptually, labor unions are bottom-up organizations that ideally serve the interests of the rank and file members. Leaders at all levels are elected, and union members are provided the opportunity to vote, express opinions, or have voice, and such. In contrast, corporations are top-down organizations designed to serve the interests of their owners. These distinctions are significant as we intend to understand the distinct goals, strategies, and decision-making processes of labor unions and corporations. Of course, it's also good to recognize the likenesses between the two entities, structures, procedures, functions, and the like. Possible management strategies toward labor unions is our current topic on screen. Many union strategies are reactive rather than proactive in that they're developed in reaction to managerial strategies. As such, we can approach an understanding of strategies from two management perspectives or attitudes toward unions, acceptance or avoidance. Theoretically, there's a third possibility, union encouragement, but typically companies prefer to be non-union. If management is working toward becoming non-union or remaining non-union, this is termed union avoidance. If management accepts, even begrudgingly, the presence of a union or efforts to establish a union, this is termed union acceptance. How these translate into labor relations strategies is related to the organization's approach to human resources, which is in turn rooted in its business strategy. And business strategies fall into two categories or types: cost leadership, which emphasizes low cost and likely pursued via an autocratic human resource strategy, emphasizing minimized labor costs with labor as a commodity, equity and voice as market-based terms, and efficiency is paramount. An example of this might be a mass production assembly line where employees are pushed to work harder and threatened with discipline or discharge if they're not producing. And differentiation strategies emphasize product quality and features and are typically pursued through a human resource strategy that develops, rewards, and even empowers employees to create a loyal and productive workforce where equity and voice are important, where equity essentially equals fair treatment and protective benefits and individual voice, which then is reflected in open door policies that foster loyalty, satisfaction, and productivity. And finally, managers motivate employees through establishment of conditions of commitment and responsibility when they're using that particular strategy. Overall, this involves participative decision making, is paternalistic, and is a high performance model involving strategy. So let's talk a little bit about the union strategies that are implemented by managers or employers. Labor relations strategies are influenced by the aforementioned managerial attitudes toward unions. Union suppression involves a union avoidance strategy, or union busting, whereby autocratic employers or managers employ tactics such as harassment, demotion, or firing of union supporters. Although these behaviors would be considered to be illegal, they're nonetheless, and surprisingly, common. There are several other tactics that employers exercise to suppress unions, such as plant closings, outsourcing, bankruptcies, and double breasting, which is opening of non-union operations in the same market. This is especially popular in the construction industry today. In paternalistic or strategic organizations, a union avoidance strategy is union substitution. This is where management adopts policies and practices to keep unions out by making them unnecessary. Table 5.6 in our book outlines the union suppression and union substitution approaches and practices pretty thoroughly and succinctly. This slide is essentially a reproduction of Table 5.6 on page 172 in our text, and it does a pretty thorough job of summarizing union avoidance tactics that some companies put into action. And you can see that in terms of union suppression, it's some of the things that I already mentioned, like firing or harassing union supporters, screening out pro-union applicants, plant closings and bankruptcy, subcontracting and outsourcing, investing in non-union sites, and so forth. What I noticed is, as I was reading about union suppression, I thought of the video that we had watched about Walmart. It seems to me that that is really what Walmart has done, a lot of union suppression, at least according to that video. And then there's union substitution, whereby they're trying to keep out unions by creating a positive working environment. So they offer above market pay and benefits. They provide opportunities for training and development. They're respectful in their supervision. And you can see the rest. I don't need to read all of those to you, but I at least wanted to touch on it. Now we'll talk a little bit about the various environments within labor relations, and then we'll talk about ethics and influences and constraints. So the various labor relations environments, as you can see on the screen, include legal, economic, socio-political, and ethical. I'll talk a little bit more about each of these on the next few slides. In the legal environment, you can see that it's really not confined by labor law. The legal system in every country determines, excuse me, sorry for that pause. The legal system in every country determines the framework for labor management interactions. The NLRA establishes the processes for forming new unions and for bargaining union contracts in the U.S. private sector. So the legal environment, as I said, isn't confined to labor law. Instead, it includes U.S. employment standards established by various legislation, including those ones that I have on the screen, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which focuses on minimum wage and overtime payments, the Civil Rights Act, which focuses on non-discrimination, Occupational Health and Safety Act, which focuses on the workplace safety for employees, the Family Medical Leave Act, which provides unpaid leave as people need it in cases of family medical emergencies or situations. And then there are the other areas involving tax laws, bankruptcy codes, deregulation, common law, and then the employment at will doctrine. The economic environment includes the labor market, the market for employers' products and services, markets for other factors of production, financial markets, the state of the overall economy, and labor demand. All of these influence labor relations. Concession bargaining is needed when unemployment is high, and it's a method whereby many unions agree to wage, benefit, and work rule concessions or givebacks to try to save jobs. Globalization also represents a major shift in the environment, and technology affects manufacturing. So in other words, relative supply and demand for various occupations. And both of these influence labor relations, the concession bargaining and the globalization. The socio-political environment includes factors stemming from social and political arenas that influence labor and management. The social part of labor relations, of the labor relations environment may favor labor or management depending on the extent of social support for each group. For instance, employment outcomes can be influenced by public attitudes toward labor unions, and the PATCO strike is an example of that. Business and labor can also lobby political leaders for favorable treatment. Some employee groups rely on political lobbying rather than collective bargaining to improve wages and working conditions. An example of this would be the International Union of Gambling Employees, as well as the NEA. The ethical environment involves 6 key theories: utility, liberty, duty, fairness, virtue, and care. And tables 5.7 and 5.8 in the book do a pretty good job of summarizing that. And actually, in the next several slides, I will just quickly review each of those 6 key theories. Widespread codes of ethics developed by corporations, labor unions, and professional associations for their employees and members underscore the belief that ethical foundations shape behavior. To best understand behavior and outcomes in labor relations, we really have to have a solid grasp of the various environments within labor relations. So it's not surprising that our book would have much of a chapter dedicated to this. So as you can see, in terms of utility, the focal point is the greatest good for the greatest number. I'm not going to review each of these. Instead, I'm going to just focus on the example that is provided of utility or the various other key theories that we're reviewing. Management, so the example for utility is that management desires to be union-free based on a cost-benefit analysis, and they have a provision of equity and voice only because they increase productivity. So as I read each of these, or had read each of these and reviewed them again, doesn't necessarily seem that they're very ethical. At least some of them aren't. Liberty, for the focal point for liberty, is that freedom is a negative right to be left alone. I don't even know if I fully understand this, but the example I think helps a little bit. Employer participation in the union organizing process because of the rights of private property and free speech. So at least they're able to be involved. And then there's the theory of duty, which recognizes respect for human dignity. And an example of this is where employees are entitled to voice because they are rational human beings who should not be treated only as a means to some other end. And that seems like a good philosophy to me. And fairness represents justice through liberty, equal opportunity, and concern for the least well off. And an example of this is unions negotiating compressed wage structures that narrow the gap between unskilled and skilled workers in the name of fairness. I don't know how others feel about that, but I find that one to be interesting. Virtue focuses on moral character to achieve happiness. Might does not make right. I don't even know if I fully understand that either, but as it goes on, it says rather establish productive workplaces or engage in collective bargaining based on excellence and integrity. That sounds good, at least in theory. Care focuses on nurturing personal relationships. And I found it interesting that in the book, I think it's Carol Gilligan who is the focus, not the focus, but the person who they use as a researcher to provide additional information for this one, or a foundation or basis for it. Recent union initiatives to organize workers by developing special relationships with the workers, especially in female-dominated occupations, is the example used for this one. Ultimately, I think it comes down to a focus on the goals of unions and management and just what exactly does that mean. So labor unions and management or employers definitely have some similar interests. They certainly have some separate ones as well. But from the standpoint of ethics, having them meet somewhere in the middle to satisfy these common interests seems most appropriate and productive. I don't know if others would agree, but that really concludes my presentation. I realize that has only taken maybe 18 to 20 minutes, but perhaps now we could have some discussion and I can present the article that I shared with Dr. Ferketic. Thank you.